Okay, hello everybody. How are we doing today? Um, Looking forward to this interview. I will be speaking tonight with Alistair Rennie of Ruptured World, who we all should be familiar with from the legendary Cryo Chamber label. So I laugh, but I'm serious. Yeah, I'll go ahead and pull Alistair in. I forgot to Alistair and to everybody here, I forgot to get him set up exactly right here on my screen. So, oh, it's perfect from before. Great. All right, we got you on the screen. I think we should be able to hear you now. And if nobody can hear
Yeah.
me or him, please let us know ASAP. I always say at the beginning, these live streams are a lot of fun and I love the interactivity of it, but it can be a little bit daunting if anything ever goes wrong. So you need
Yeah.
like on the second fixes. But I'm cool
It's
with that.
always risky.
Yeah.
Can you hear me okay,
I
Michael?
can definitely hear you good. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think we should be
Excellent.
good in chat as well. It seems like nobody's
Yeah.
telling us that there's any problems yet, so hopefully we're good
Good.
here.
Good,
Um
good. Yeah.
yeah, so how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, it's getting quite late. Well, not late. It's about 8 o'clock here in Scotland. It's been a terrible day. Like the weather, we're getting some pretty rough weather just now. There's kind of like flooding and rain, torrential rain, and gale force winds are being predicted for tonight and tomorrow, which is good inspiration for dark ambient
I
music.
was gonna say that sounds wonderful. As long as it doesn't knock
Yeah,
out a power line and shut you down,
no,
then that sounds. I
yeah,
love that kind of weather. I hear gale force winds, and I'm like, time to pull
yeah,
out the field recorder. This might be the good one.
exactly, exactly. And we've actually the flat. It's a very nice flat where we live, But this door we've got, it's a big kind of metal door, big glass door with a kind of metal surround, and it whistles in the wind. When it gets really
Yeah.
windy, it does this kind of like howling noises, and I always keep, trying to remind myself to record it,
Mm-hmm.
so, one day I will, just get onto recording it and I'll use it as, a sound effect or do some sampling with it. It should be quite good,
I yeah,
So,
on the topic, I have yet to make any of my own dark ambient music, but I spent a lot of
right.
time capturing field recordings, and
Yeah.
I said I think to me like the capturing of field recordings is like as much fun, if not more fun, than the creation of the music itself. Like it's
Yeah.
so fun to just like
Yeah.
I made like a notebook and I was just like logging like what all of the different things were that I had done and I was going to
Yeah.
do. Um
Yeah.
yeah, so
I mean, field recordings actually become very central to the stuff I do,
oh yeah.
Um, and it is, I mean, it's such a fantastic experience when you go out there field recording. And there's something about the process that really connects you, with the natural world. That I don't know what it is. You have the headphones on, and once you get the mic going, it just seems to kind of project you into this kind of like this different way of thinking about the world around you or experiencing the world around you. And I think there is this sense that you kind of become much closer to the natural world,
Absolutely.
and kind of it's I think field recording is kind of like a way of accessing an experience of the natural world that we don't normally experience, in a way that we don't normally experience it. And it's a fascinating thing, a fascinating process, and always good as well, just, for taking back and building on with the electronic stuff as well. So
Yeah, yeah,
great.
you're reminding me of all of the reasons that I liked it so much. Yeah, because like when when you're just wandering, if you're taking a hike for instance, it's so easy to get lost in your head. Even though, your whole point is to go out into nature and enjoy nature, like you still end up just thinking about this, thinking about that, ignoring this,
Yeah,
ignoring that.
yeah,
And whether you're like on a specific mission to capture field recordings or whether it just like happens spontaneously, you
yeah,
like change the way that you listen to the world. Like
yeah,
you're like,
yeah,
oh, that's what I'm looking for. Like first
yeah.
you're like open like a like a satellite dish, like just like waiting for the
Yeah,
transmission to come in, and then when it hits, you're
yeah,
like, there it is. This is what I've
yeah.
been waiting for.
Absolutely, and it is it's very interesting, like you say. I mean, I go out into the mountains a lot, do a lot of trekking in Scotland and also in Italy, where I lived for about 10 years, and my wife's Italian, so we go over there a lot,
Yeah.
and there is like the way that you tune into the natural world. If you're walking, like you say, you almost get into this kind of trance, and then you start thinking about all sorts of other things, and you're not necessarily concentrating on exactly what's in front of you, until you hit those kind of panoramic kind of spots where you obviously are kind of taking in the visuals of things, But with field recording, it's like you get hardwired into things, and you start to pay attention to the sounds that ordinarily, might just be part of the overall backdrop of things,
Yeah.
And I do find it a fascinating experience, and I've recently kind of like, specifically targeted certain things, like there's a colony of gannets up in the area where I come from. It's up in the north, sort of northeast of Scotland, and I went and got sort of some field recordings of these gannets, and gannet colonies are really spectacular to see. There's hundreds and hundreds of these birds. Certainly in the British Isles, they're the biggest seabird in the British Isles, so they're quite big.
Okay.
And they make this really amazing kind of guttural kind of sound,
Nice.
And yeah, it's fantastic. And when you hear them all together, it's just this incredible kind of wall of sound, But if you can get close enough, you start to get the individual kind of guttural sounds, and it's I got some really good recordings that speaking of like gale force winds, that the problem in Scotland, and I'm sure it would be the same in some parts of North America, is the wind never really stops, and if you're using very sensitive microphones, and I've got a pretty good one. I've got this Rode NT4
Oh, nice.
microphone. Yeah, it's an absolute cracker. It's really great, and but it's so sensitive that the slightest breeze will just interfere with everything.
Yeah.
But I did the day that I went to I targeted the gannet colony, which is a place called Troop Head near a town called Banff, which was the original Banff, not the one in Canada. And it's a spectacular, setting, and right, it's these cliffs. They're pretty high up. They're about 300 odd feet or something, and usually you would always get, wind coming in, of variable strength,
Yeah.
But this day, it was kind of a day that was part of this heat wave that we had over the summer. The air was really generally very still, So I was really, really lucky, So we might see some of these gannet sounds creeping into some of the Ruptured World work in the future, We'll see what I can do with them.
That sounds
But yeah,
awesome. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. I'm glad we just like randomly went into a field recording conversation because
yeah, yeah.
if it's not the most interesting thing for me about your music. Not to say that it's not like one of the best things, but just
Hmm.
as far as like my specific interest to Ruptured World, the story is just so cool. But
Yeah,
your use of
thanks.
I mean, sort of everything that you're doing in that process, I guess, there's just a lot more microphone use in general, I feel like, with what you do than with what a lot of other artists are doing. I have my Palo Santo going here. I quit smoking cigarettes, so this is not that.
Looks like a cigar or
I
something
know.
you got there.
That would probably be nice, but that would set me
Yeah,
off.
yeah, 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 yeah. No, I can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah, but and so to take the just before we get away from this topic, the other thing I wanted to mention that I found really cool about field recordings is once like I said, you sort of like tap into this way of thinking about things, but then as soon as
Hmm.
you hit the record button, you are forced to basically meditate. Like
Yeah,
you
yeah,
can meditate or you can go crazy, because if you're
yeah,
trying to capture 6 to 7 minutes of sound, like
mhm,
in meditation you're like, "Oh, I want to scratch my head. Oh, I want to get up and see what's going on over there." But when you hit the
yeah,
record button, it doesn't matter what your brain wants to do. You have to sit down and shut up.
yeah, yeah. And you do, and it can be very hard. I mean, I actually, I guess the more that I've done it, I kind of I've developed a sort of guerrilla tactic, if that makes sense. Where, for example, I quite like sea caves, and obviously in a sea cave you get some very interesting acoustics. Um, and I kind of got so frustrated with that idea of being very, very still whilst you're recording, a good like 4, 5, 6 minutes of sounds from it. And basically, what I try to do now is I go in, move quickly, get a recording in a minute, 2 minutes,
Hmm.
then relax, then do a bit, kind of wander around a bit, and then do it again. Because in the end, I found that what you end up doing really is if you have a longer kind of recording of 5, 6, 7 minutes, whatever,
Hmm.
you end up just editing out the best bits and using the best bits, and you end up not really using that much. Um, it's not like you play the whole 5, 6, 7 minutes and put music over the top of it or whatever. I mean, in my case, certainly, I'll kind of edit out specific bits,
Hmm.
specific sounds that interest me, or just specific movements of the water that seem to work better. The Rode NT4 is a stereo mic, so sometimes you'll get the movement of the wave, the sound of the wave, coinciding with the movement from left to right and everything.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll try and do like very kind of quick bursts of recording, um, and then out again, and then I'll listen through it. If it's not so interesting, I'll just do it again, because I do find it very difficult, especially with this Rode mic, which is really sensitive. Staying still for a long time can be difficult. And honestly, with this thing, all you need to do is just brush against, the lead, or just make the slightest movement with your clothes, and lo and behold, you've got this kind of rustle of sort of funny sounds going on.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because
I have
the
kind of,
louder you
yeah,
can crank the sound up, the better, the crisper it is. And if you've got
yeah,
rustling around and heavy
yeah,
breathing and
yeah,
sniffing and rubbing your
yeah.
beard, all of that stuff gets picked up.
It just everything does. It's incredible. And I think actually the hardest one for me was I was out in the Cairngorms, which is like a plateau. It's kind of like the group of some of the highest mountains in Scotland, and it's like a plateau. It's a very kind of wild area,
Nice.
and there had been quite heavy snowfall. And then there was me, my son was with me, and we went a walk into the Cairngorms, and the sun was out. This was like the day after the heavy snowfall, and the snow started to melt off of the trees nearby, and the sound of the snow melt, these bits of snow falling through the branches, and or sometimes landing with like a thump. It was beautiful. So I got the mic out, and I was standing under one of the trees, recording this, and you had to wait quite a bit of time before a piece of snow melt would come down. So I was honestly, I was about 20 minutes. I was there trying to stay as still as possible. And it was quite agonizing. But I did manage to catch some really good sounds. But on a couple of occasions, there was some snow melt actually landed on top of me, and you can hear that in the
Yeah.
sound recording.
It sounds different.
Yeah, yeah. But you can hear, because it was just becoming too painful to kind of like stay still. And you can hear me kind of like moving sometimes just to get that relief.
Yeah.
Uh, my poor son, he was like, about 10 feet away, standing as still as he could. And I told him, don't
I
move,
was
be
about to
quiet.
say, how old is your son, if you don't mind me asking?
No, that's all. No, he's 14
Oh,
now.
okay. He's
So
old enough that you could get him to shut up. I was like,
yeah,
if he's a bit
yeah,
younger than that, like if he's like a toddler or something, that would be a hard task.
impossible, impossible. Yeah,
Stay
yeah. I
still,
mean,
son. What do you mean, stay still?
no, exactly. Especially if there's snow around for throwing snowballs and whatnot.
Yeah.
But this, he was about 12. This was a couple of years ago. But yeah, but that's the thing. Certain situations you really have to kind of apply yourself in a certain way.
Yeah.
Like I say, I've tried to develop this kind of this kind of guerrilla technique of just getting in and out quick, um,
Yeah, that makes
and
sense.
yeah, it doesn't always work, but it's an approach.
Yeah, see, I mean, that's the more amateur side for me because like in my head I'm like I'm one day I'm going to capture the perfect 7 minute recording and then I'm going to
Yeah,
make a 7 minute song out of that and then you guys that
yeah,
do it all the time you're like, dude, that's never going to happen. You get the 2 minutes and you make it work.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I guess that's the thing. I mean, if you were going to use longer recordings, you might do that for a more kind of documentary
Yeah.
kind of type style sound recording. But yeah, obviously, if you're putting together something like dark ambient, you can really you don't need to kind of hold back. You can experiment in all sorts of ways. I'll experiment quite a bit with pitch. Changing the pitch of certain things,
Yeah.
which if you're talking about bird sounds, like the gannet sounds or gull sounds, there was a gull colony that I got some really good recordings with. And when you start to lower the pitch of these birds, all of a sudden they sound like prehistoric animals,
That's awesome.
or pterodactyls rather than
Nice.
seagulls,
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of weird and wonderful things you can do, and with water effects, taking like the sea caves, you get this fantastic acoustics, with waves coming into the mouth of the cave or whatever. And again, if you play around with the pitch, you can get some really remarkable kind of sounds that start to sound like something else, not like water, but if you put it deep enough, it just you get sounds. It's like explosions and all sorts of stuff happening. So it's a useful resource. Any of the sound recordings that you can capture.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so I guess that was a very fun intro, but so maybe you
Yeah.
want to go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit and maybe just go ahead and sort of tell us about I guess, just start with telling us how you got to the point of starting to make dark ambient and then we'll get into a
Mhm.
bit more of the details of what you're actually doing, but
Yeah.
how did you discover the genre and what led you to decide to really start working with it?
Well, I mean, going back a long way, I guess. I mean, I've always been involved in music,
Yeah,
and
I'm interested to go back as far as is this ever is as
right,
relevant.
yeah, it's a long, long way
Yeah,
back.
yeah.
But from the point of view of music, especially, I'm very fortunate that I've got two older brothers, and
Nice.
when you have older siblings, you pick up on the stuff that they're listening to. And of course, if they're older, they're getting into stuff well before you might normally have got into, if you didn't have these older brothers and
Yeah.
stuff. So the oldest brother, I mean, he was, right into the punk rock stuff right from the start, and I picked up on a lot of that, and I still love a lot of the punk stuff. Still listen to some of it, but when the thing that I first heard that really had a major impact on me was stuff that I would probably describe as kind of proto goth. The stuff that we now call goth, but there wasn't really a name for it at the time when it started to happen. And I saw it was one of my best friends who knows me very well. We were really into kind of various things to do with the supernatural, the local kind of legends, mythologies, that all the kind of more mystical aspects of nature and stuff. We always had a big interest and passion for this,
Nice.
and we were big horror fans as well. And he said to me one day, I used to go out and stay. He lived in the edge of these woods in Scotland, and I used to go out and stay at his at the weekend, come back in to Aberdeen, the city where I lived. I grew up near where he lived, but we moved into the city or the town. It's not big enough to call a city, I think. But and one day when I was going back into town, and he just said to me, "Watch Riverside," which was this music program. He says, "Watch it tomorrow. There's a band on that I think you'll be interested in." And so I watched it, and it was Bauhaus doing Bela Lugosi's Dead.
Oh, nice.
And it just blew me away. I mean, it really did just change my world. When you first hear something that really resonates with you to that extent. It's a defining kind of experience.
Yeah.
And then from there, me and this particular friend, we got into the Virgin Prunes, who are still a big favourite of mine. The Birthday Party, that was Nick Cave's band before he went on to do his solo thing. Early Cure. Once the Cure got like a little bit more kind of poppy, I kind of lost interest, although I understand why they did that. But I do prefer the kind of the nihilistic kind of stuff, the earlier stuff
Yeah.
that they did. And then, and from there, well, I guess, just as time went on, I just started listening to so much stuff, and I've always had a very eclectic kind of tastes, but and listened to various things. In the 90s, I listened to a lot of kind of modern jazz stuff,
Oh, nice.
stuff like the Pat Metheny group, Aldo Meola, John McLaughlin. I played the guitar, so I was trying to play like they did, which is impossible, but I tried. Bands like Weather Report, and there's a guy called Jan Garbereck, a Norwegian tenor sax player, and one of the things about these guys is they used synths quite a lot. They were quite innovative with the electronics sort of like side of things. So I was listening to that, and at the same time, I picked up on like the Tangerine Dream. I'd been listening to them for such a long time,
Awesome.
and David Sylvian, who was the singer in Japan, a band called Japan, um, and David Sylvian developed a solo career that involved a lot of what I think we would now describe as dark ambient or ambient kind of music. And he did an album uh, called Gone to Earth, which was a double album. And one of the albums of this double album, he does a collaboration with Robert Fripp, the guitarist Robert Fripp. And this stuff is very much sort of ambient with kind of quite a significant kind of element of darkness to it. And that was, if I look back, that was one of the kind of, the first kind of things that I heard that really got me interested in the idea of producing my own music along those kind of lines. Um, and around about, I guess, in the 90s as well, I started to become aware of some of the electronic stuff that was going on, Underworld and Orbital and Aphex
I loved
Twin.
Orbital back in the 90s.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's all good stuff, but I think it was when Boards of Canada came along. That was a band who really, again, kind of like got me interested in the idea of producing, electronic based music.
Yeah.
Um, and I think they resonated with me because they come from Scotland, and I think they grew up in a town which is where my grandmother grew up, which is it's not that far from the place where the Gannet colony is.
Nice.
It's a place called Cullen, and their music kind of like does, I think, capture the atmosphere of that place. So I had a particular kind of, I was drawn into it quite a bit, and so Boards of Canada were always a band that interested me a lot. And at the same time, I kind of, I was, and I guess this would have been around about the late 90s, early noughties. I started kind of exploring more to see what was out there, and I came across stuff, like Black Tape for a Blue Girl,
Yeah.
and Arcana. I was always a fan of Dead Can Dance,
Nice.
who I saw actually in London a few years ago, which was great.
Oh, yeah.
So I mean, I guess all this stuff was kind of feeding in to things, and then I discovered the Cryo Chamber label, and I saw what the guys, or I heard what the guys were doing there, and I'm probably not alone when I say that, when I first heard the Cryo Chamber stuff, it just blew me away, what the guys were doing, and
Yeah.
this is going back quite a few years when I first picked up on the Cryo Chamber stuff, and at that point, yeah, I mean, I was kind of quite heavily into creating electronic stuff, but I still kind of, it's funny, I think it takes quite a long time to kind of reach a point where you feel that you're actually doing stuff that is what you've always been aiming for, if you know what I mean. It's kind
Yeah.
of, you can buy a digital audio workstation, you can get some plugins, and you can start making music right away. But I think it takes quite a long time before you actually manage to produce the kind of music that you've always been aiming for. So it took a while before I think I managed to start producing stuff that felt like it was maybe um, good enough to start maybe submitting to Cryo Chamber,
Yeah.
especially. Um, so yeah, and along the way, I mean, I still listen to quite a wide variety of stuff. Probably I listen to electronic music more than anything now, and that will be stuff, the Cryo Chamber artists, right through to I listened to Burial recently for the first time. I was always aware of Burial, but I'd never really listened to his stuff. And then I heard it, and I thought, my goodness, it's terrific stuff. Just a lot of the sounds very different to anything that I would try and do myself.
Hmm.
Um, and I think it'd be very difficult to do what he does anyway. But I'm just amazed by the techniques that he uses and the kind of the sounds that he manages to produce.
Yeah.
Um, so you're always discovering new stuff, and bands like Autechre and Finesse and Fortet, these kind of I guess like indie electronic kind of stuff or whatever. I'll listen to that quite a lot. And Tangerine Dream, I always like to listen to Tangerine when I'm driving. I'll very often just put on Tangerine Dream because it's great music for driving. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah,
yeah, I
yeah,
mean,
you've got to have a whole different variety of your ambient or electronic music that is for driving than you listen to when you're
yeah,
indoors. I have
absolutely, yeah.
I have like a totally different soundtrack for my car than I do for my room.
Yeah, yeah. No, but that's the thing. I think electronic music, especially, there's always a kind of electronic music or a type of electronic music that's appropriate for particular environments or particular settings, particular activities.
Hmm.
Um, I find that I would listen to cryo chamber stuff when I'm walking or in the train. If I travel by train,
Yeah.
I think it's. But if I'm driving, for some reason, it just doesn't feel right for driving.
Yeah, yeah, it doesn't work in the car.
Yeah, it's
Unless I
funny.
love listening to Ugashania while I'm driving in the snow though. That's my one
Yeah,
difference.
yeah. No, absolutely,
That guy
absolutely.
makes the most amazing polar ambient music in existence.
Yeah,
Yeah, well,
yeah,
Northon as well, but Ugashania is a bit more just like directly in touch with the field recordings than Northon.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. No, absolutely. I totally agree. I think one of his albums was one of the first ones I actually bought, the Cry Chamber.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Like Call of
yeah.
the
And
North or White Silence or something.
I think it was White Silence
Yeah,
actually.
that was his first
Uh,
one. So yeah, that's or
yeah,
his first one on
yeah.
Cryo Chamber at least. Yeah, he has a lot of great stuff on his Bandcamp page that anybody that knows.
Oh, yeah,
If you guys can, I'm glad you know who I'm talking about because like I had to get my
yeah.
Russian friend to explain to me how to pronounce the name, and I was saying it like
Yeah,
Agasani or something like that, and he's like, nah,
yeah.
Ugashenya. I'm like,
Yeah.
Ugashenya, okay.
I'm actually too scared to say the name, to try and say some of the names of the guys in Cryo Chamber because I've no idea if I'm pronouncing them correctly or not half the time.
Yeah.
But um, but yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
I'm
I
glad you.
usually try to get somebody from like that country to I'm like, how do I
Yeah,
say this? And they're like,
yeah,
you say it like this, and I'm like, okay, I think I can do that.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I'm
No, it is. It's tricky,
oh
tricky.
man, since I started this Twitch channel, it is It is a
Yeah,
nightmare trying to pronounce project names, people's
yeah,
names. You have a nice, easy name, and I probably still manage to say it
yeah.
wrong. No, but no, it's like,
No,
oh my god, like, how do
that's
I say this person's name? And I'm like
yeah,
sounding it out syllable by syllable as people are sitting there laughing at me.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it's absolutely the case. So it's unavoidable,
Yeah. Yeah, I just you just
and
have to throw the pride to the side and just be like, you know what I'm doing, you know what I'm trying to do here. I'm sorry.
yeah, yeah. I actually, I lived over in Italy because when I met my wife and we were studying in Scotland, and when we finished, we moved over to Italy, and I didn't speak any Italian at all, and so I had to just learn. And but I spent the first 2 years, I hardly spoke to anyone
Yeah.
because the inhibition that you feel, it's just so strong that I just didn't speak to anyone. But then suddenly I just realized that if you didn't get over that inhibition, you would just never learn.
Mhm.
And so I just suddenly started speaking to everyone and making lots and lots of mistakes and very often pronouncing things wrong. But I got so used to it that I'm quite unabashed about it now. I'll just say things. And the good thing about Italian, however, is it's very phonetic.
Yeah.
So the spellings, you kind of tend to you pronounce them the way it's written.
Yep.
Uh, from our point of view, which obviously you can't do if it's in Cyrillic or if it's Swedish
Yeah.
or something. It's just you're just guessing.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
I took some years of Latin, so and then
Okay. Yeah.
I spent 6 weeks in Italy in Rome, so I
Right.
I
Yeah.
did not learn any Italian while I was there, but I know what you mean
Yeah.
about just being like the
Yeah.
thing that I had to get over is like you have to make yourself sound like an Italian to be
Yeah.
understood by Italians. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah. Yeah.
no, I'm not. It's you're not being stupid. Like you have to have the accent. It's part
Yeah.
of the language.
That's it. And they have an expression like you eat the words when you speak Italian. So you've got to open your mouth wide. Of course, in Scotland, people mumble.
Yeah.
We're so used to kind of speaking like that, and all of a sudden, and then before I knew it, I was doing all the hand gestures and everything, without realizing it. Just picked up on it, and even now, I think it was about 10 years that we moved back to Scotland about 10 years ago. And I still do the hand gestures and everything, even when I'm speaking English, I'm just so used to it.
Yeah.
But,
Um not to get too deep into politics, and I won't really go into them at all, but
oh,
as an interesting political cultural thing, I heard the other day that
yeah,
when Italians moved to America, like there was a lot of racism against Italians here, and they
yeah,
literally had to like train themselves to like hold their hands behind their back while they talked
yeah,
because the
yeah.
moving of the hands was like, "Oh, you're an Italian." And it's
It
like,
gives them
"Oh my
away.
god, they
Yeah,
found out." And they're like they
yeah,
literally
yeah,
had to
yeah.
like hide their hands because they
Goodness.
yeah, so
I can believe
that's as
that.
deep as I'll go into politics, but I heard
Yeah,
that and
yeah,
I
yeah,
was like, "Wow, that's interesting." So when you
yeah.
mentioned the
I can
hand thing, I
imagine.
was like, "Oh, I talk with my hands all the time, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not
yeah.
Italian, but I can
It would
totally
be
appreciate
extremely
it."
difficult. Yeah, I mean, it would be really difficult for them to, because it's kind of part of their language in a way.
Yeah. So are you
Um,
like would you consider yourself fully fluent now in Italian?
well, sort of.
Yeah.
I think it's like, I mean, I can generally speak Italian. Probably my comprehension's a lot better. I still make quite a lot of mistakes when I'm speaking,
Yeah, you can
and it
understand
kind
it
of
better than you
depends.
can speak it back to people.
Yeah, and my written Italian's pretty good, I think. But I would be described as fluent, I guess.
Yeah.
But just not in a kind of, strict kind of try and speak the language perfectly kind of way, you
Mhm.
know. My wife's actually, she studied language and literature, and she teaches at a college. She teaches language at a college, so she's very strict about getting everything right,
That's awesome. Yeah, that's probably
Whereas I'm
helpful.
like, oh, yeah, yeah. Well, it is up to a point, because
Helpful and
um,
frustrating.
well, especially for her, I think,
Oh yeah.
because I'm just like, who
You're
cares as
like
long as we
whatever and she's
understand
like
each other.
no.
Yeah, it is. It is like that. But
Yeah, that makes sense.
anyway. Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
But anyway, just thinking about, I think, yeah, going back to the question, we keep digress. Sorry, that's my fault.
No,
Keep
it's okay. I'm
digressing.
totally
But
cool with it.
I just remembered one thing actually that I suppose is kind of, well, definitely, certainly very important is that the from a very young age, because I had older brothers and we started playing in bands, like punk bands and everything.
Hmm.
And eventually I went and I was playing in a band that was, I suppose you would call it like an indie band. But me and the friend who kind of like alerted me to Bauhaus, we actually we had a side project that we always had going on that was much more along the lines of a kind of, I mean, I wouldn't even describe it as, it was kind of proto goth, but a very experimental thing that we did, and we were very young, But when I look back, there were certain things that we were doing is kind of like a proto dark ambient kind of thing. That I had this keyboard. It was like a Casio MT40.
Yeah.
Very cheap and kind of cheap and nasty. I mean, we couldn't afford synthesizers or anything. Synths were still very expensive.
They still are.
They still are. Yeah, yeah. But they'd only
I
recently
just like to
become.
play with the Moog when my brother's looking at guitars. I'm like, okay, I'm going over to play with the Moogs.
Yeah, yeah. But oh no, that was just well out of our kind of league. So, but it was a good thing in a way because we had to just improvise. And so I had this Casio MT40, and then we had a couple of kind of broken acoustic guitars, and we just used things, biscuit tins and motorbike helmets and anything that could make a sound.
Yeah.
And we did kind of songs that were not kind of anything like the kind of songs that we were playing in the bands that we were playing with, kind of like guitar based, kind of like music, whatever. And um and it's interesting because when I first got hold of like some software and started to kind of do stuff, my original idea was to kind of do what we'd been doing like way back in the kind of 80s.
Hmm.
It was, kind of do that, but then kind of integrate it with the kind of like the digital kind of electronic kind of stuff. And we did actually do some of that. But then I gradually kind of just drifted more towards doing what I guess the kind of the stuff that you're familiar with now.
Yeah.
But we're still working on stuff. Me and this particular friend.
Oh,
We're
that's
still
awesome.
kind of doing this kind of stuff, but because of COVID and everything, we just haven't kind of been doing so much.
Yeah.
But I think that was probably the origins of Ruptured World. Even it was kind of it's always been there. This kind of desire to do something that's like a bit more kind of experimental, that is more about capturing atmosphere rather than just you know songs with melodies and things.
Yeah. Yeah, your music is like it's very I mean, I find that even interesting that I guess it's I find it interesting that that you're into goth stuff almost at all. Like because
Yeah.
from the dark ambient perspective, like from the perspective of how I know your music,
Mhm.
it sort of seems like it just like transcends like flavors of music. Like
Yeah.
there's not it's dark ambient clearly, but the dark part has nothing to do with like goth in the terms
Yeah.
of Ruptured World. It is so it's like science ambient is what it's like
Yeah.
archaeology ambient. Like it's not really
Yeah.
like any other project out there, honestly.
Mhm.
And I mean, I was saying like the field recordings are secondary to me because the main thing to me is like I went to college to for archaeology was one of the main things. So when I started
Right.
hearing those
Yeah.
voices, the different communications that you have in
Mhm.
there, dude, I
Yeah.
was like, oh my god, this is so fucking cool. Like,
Yeah.
I was really excited to hear the
Yeah.
direction that you took this project, the themes of at least these three albums. And
Mhm.
so I guess before we get too far into because I would like to go into some detail about what you would
Mhm.
say about the specifics of these albums and what your plans are moving forward, but it just
Mhm.
on a general basis still, what led you to do something like this? And also maybe if I know that you also are a writer, so if that ties into this at all, which I feel like it might, maybe this would be a natural time to go ahead and bring up that section of your background too.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, music's always been something. It's been I guess a fundamental thing in my life. As it has been in the family. It's a very musical family, and then with friends and things. It's just something that's always been there. And then in my case, writing was always a thing. It was always something that I wanted to be. I wanted to be a writer. Something I wanted to do and something I wanted to be. And I think like a lot of people who become writers, that it's something that it strikes you from a very young age, and it's just something you just know. It's something that you want to aim for. Um, it's very interesting the way that it kind of works. But basically, what happened with me, I mean, I didn't really start writing until quite late on. I was reading a lot and I was so involved in playing in bands and music. And then I went to university. Well, I left school with no qualifications, and I worked in the building trade, what we call the building trade. I think you would call it the construction industry. And I was a painter and decorator, which is
Well, that's
proved
dope.
to be really, really handy.
Yeah.
It's a very kind of useful skill to
Yeah.
have, but but it's a tough job, and it's what I was really desperate really to do something like study. I was always very interested in literature and the idea of writing, and as well as music. So anyway, I managed to do night classes and to get into university, and then I ended up studying literature, and then I went on to do a PhD as well down in Edinburgh where I live now. Um, and it wasn't until after I'd finished the PhD really that I then started to write stories, because suddenly I seemed to have the space to do it. And so for quite a long time after we graduated and I was living over in Italy, I really didn't do much musically. And I guess it was always something that I was always kind of building up to this, because it was always this feeling, I need to kind of write, but I'd never actually kind of committed myself, for good reasons. Whilst I was at university, I was too busy, writing essays and dissertations and a thesis. And then I just suddenly had the time, and I was living in Italy, so I wasn't with friends and my brothers here to be pursuing the music and stuff. So I just started for a while. I just concentrated on writing, and I was fortunate. I got some short stories published, and then I wrote a novel as well, which was published by an indie publisher based in America, based in the States, which is great because there's more people
Yeah.
in America. And and I've kind of
We're
been
big on
associated.
consuming things here as well, so
Yes, yes, it's great. It's consume away. Yes. But and then it was, I guess, like eventually the two, the music and the writing just started to converge. Um, After a while of concentrating writing, I just had this kind of revelation, way behind everyone else in many ways. But I just realized, hold on a minute, you can get like software to make music with, and I can put it on my computer, and I don't need to be, around friends and everything all the time for
yeah.
making music. I can do it, and I was like, why didn't I think of this before?
Yeah, and thank God you
Um,
had this realization before 2020.
yeah, no,
You were
exactly.
already ready for it.
Yeah, and it was funny, and then I had the idea, like, the stuff that me and my friend did way back. I thought, well, we can do that, but we can start to kind of like, amalgamate it with the electronic side of things. I can take live recordings, and do and basically kind of like do this kind of mix, and then from there I just started to experiment a lot. And it's like I say, I think it took quite a long time. I mean, years before I reached a point where I felt that I was actually doing stuff that kind of felt like the stuff I was always aiming to do.
Yeah.
Um, and that's when I submitted to Cryo Chamber. And a I was in a bit of a dialogue with Simon for a while, and I think he was kind of pushing me. He could see that there was more there, you
Yeah.
know. And at some point, I'd started kind of doing this narrative, and then I just thought, I wonder if Simon would like this, you know. And then I kind of did the narrative with some of the songs that he'd already heard, but
Yeah.
like I say, I think he was pushing me. He wanted more and more, you know. And then I kind of like put together the stuff that then became the first album, you know,
Yeah.
Exoplanetary, and I think he really liked the narrative side of things, and it just all kind of fell together. Um, and I think for me personally, I mean, I think there are some writers, musicians, artists, whatever, who like to plan things. You know, you'll get some authors who'll plan out the whole novel. You know, every character, everything that happens in the plot, and they will write to that plan. You know,
Yeah.
whereas I find if I do that, it's almost like spoilers. I kind of start to lose interest and enthusiasm
Yeah.
because I know what's going to
You know
happen.
what's gonna happen at the end.
Uh, yeah, and it's weird, you know, because it just kind of, you know, and what I'll tend to do is kind of do things quite spontaneously, and then ideas will come that you know are there, and you'll kind of write towards the ideas, and you might have like a vague general picture, you know, and I think basically that's the same process with music, you know.
Yeah.
Um, I'll tend to kind of like not necessarily plan too far ahead. There might be certain things to aim for, but it's, you know, I think it's good to keep yourself kind of fresh, as it were, with the element of surprise. You know, kind of not reveal too much to yourself as you're kind of putting it together. But other people will have the opposite approach. I think other people respond more to structure. You know,
Yeah.
but me personally, I kind of pursue these things in that kind of way. And you know, it's funny because especially if it's something to do with narrative, because narrative requires a structure, and it all has to follow a you know, a very logical kind of structure. You know, so it's not like the spontaneity leads to some kind of chaotic outcome. You know, you're following a kind of instinctive path that ultimately you're going from one logical point that leads on to another kind of logical point, you know, because you have to maintain that believability, you know, with narrative, with fiction. You know, you've got to make it seem real, even though it's the wildest kind of fiction imaginable, you know.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think you reach a point where the narrative starts to come together, and it almost kind of writes itself, if you know what I mean. And you just become the vehicle, you know. And it's a bit like that with the Planetary albums, where you have these kind of two families, these kind of the McCraes and the Tarknassuses,
Hmm.
and you know, these characters. Once you've initially brought them into being, it's almost like they start to kind of create their own story, and you're just facilitating it. You know, it's funny, you know, but once you get going, it's kind of, these things tend to take on a life of their own. You know,
Yeah.
and it's a very strange, but ultimately very satisfying feeling if you can reach that point. And with writing, especially, you know, it's a difficult process, and I think most of the things that you will start off writing, that won't happen. You know, you just have to abandon it. You
Hmm.
know, um, and I tend to be quite hard on myself in that respect. If I think this is just not doing it, it's just not getting there, I'll just like, you know, I won't persevere with it. You know,
Hmm.
you've got to be able to kind of draw the line and say, no, this isn't working. Let's try something else. You know,
Yeah.
kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, it's just a rather long-winded way of kind of like answering that
No,
one.
that's
But
great. I'm cool with that.
yeah,
My point here is to get you talking, and
yes, yes.
as long as you're talking about interesting things, we're good. And this is staying interesting, so I am not complaining.
Good,
But
good.
okay, so I will want to get into some more detailed stuff now. But I think I was
Yeah,
thinking about this before I started today, and what I'd like to do is to just take 5 minutes here and play one of your tracks real quick. So, and
yeah,
you've been talking, and I was thinking I want to start doing this in streams more often because as you're having a drink right now because you've been talking a lot.
yeah,
So I'm gonna give you 5 minutes to just kind of hang out there, and
yeah.
we're gonna play. I played this one at the very beginning, but there weren't a whole lot of people here yet, and they probably weren't
Right.
fully tuned in yet. So I'm gonna go ahead and
Yeah.
play. This is one of my favorites of yours, the Rituals of Attainment Through Time. Unless you have another
Yeah.
particular track that you would like me to play instead from the Planetary
No.
series, that works for you.
Oh,
All
absolutely.
right,
Thank you.
cool.
Yeah.
So we're gonna hop into that for the next 5 minutes, and just to give people an idea of what we're talking about here, because this, as I said, this is just so much different than regular dark ambient. So let's go ahead and take five and listen to this.
Okay.
Actually, I'll let you hang out off of camera for this 5 minutes, and I'm gonna switch to a different screen here and pull up the album art.
Great. Thanks. Thanks, Michael.
All right, I'm going to bring you back on the screen now. Cool.
Yep.
Okay, so yeah, I think that'll give people, anybody that wasn't familiar with your music before, can now they've got a little crash course on what we're talking about here, or and what we're hopefully going to get into a little bit more detail about. I
Yeah.
don't know how much you want to leave as a mystery to people, and how much
Yeah.
you actually want to go into detail about things. So I will let you use your own discretion on that. I understand if you
Yeah.
want to say like, "Oh yeah, well you'll find out in the next album" or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you have to just
Uh,
gonna have to keep listening to those and figure that out. But
yeah. Yeah.
okay, so as a very basic question now about this, how much like I don't know. What made you want to do the vocals like this? And are they like on a technical stand, like from a less as an artistic thing and more as a technical thing? Like, what led you to say I'm gonna start doing these messages in the songs?
Um, it's a very good question. I mean, it's like I say, I think a lot of what I tend to do will kind of work in this kind of spontaneous fashion, and I kind of let it happen like that, you know. Um, and I don't know, like once it started coming together, you know, the idea started coming together. Um, you know, one idea just like leads on to another. So once I kind of had the idea of doing like a narrative and doing a vocal, um, certainly for the first album, it was always something that was in my mind because I really like radio. I'm really into radio. I don't mean like listening to pop music on the radio. I mean, like everything about radio. I find it to be a very mysterious kind of device. And
I've thought
I
about that
know,
too.
yeah, I mean, it's just that, especially now that we're in the digital age, there's something that's still wonderful about the radio and all the kind of magical sounds and effects that you get from it. All the interfrequency stuff is much more interesting to me than the actual radio stations, you know. And I remember, when I was a kid, we would have like a shortwave radio in the house, and I would, go to my bed with this radio, and the way that kids go to their bed with their phones these days when they're not
Yeah.
meant to,
Yep.
I would go to bed with this shortwave radio and sit going through the shortwave um, frequencies, just marveling at this, picking up stations from countries far, far away and languages you couldn't understand, such a big change to the way things are now,
Yeah.
So certainly for the first album, I just had this idea of doing a narrative where you kind of drifted in and out as if someone was going through the dial.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then, of course, the idea is that this is a transmission coming from another planet to Earth, and so the idea was that this transmission was kind of getting mixed up with all sorts of transmissions and all sorts of kind of like wavelengths and stuff that was going on, and so that side of things was always an idea, I guess, that was there. But then the kind of style of the voice, this kind of quite exaggerated kind of radio kind of voice, almost quite an archaic kind of, or a
Yeah.
what's the word, sort of like nostalgic kind of from radio transmissions from the past. It just seemed appropriate.
Yeah.
Um,
It always that just to cut in here real quick, that
yeah,
radio voice and that old movie voice, like I
yeah,
just
yeah,
always think like, is this how people used to talk, or did they just think that this is how you're supposed to talk on the radio and
yeah,
television? Like in my head,
yeah,
everybody talked like that 100 years ago.
yeah, yeah.
I would be very sad to find out that people talk like we do right now, but then when they get on the radio, they talk like this.
I mean, I think definitely there was a radio voice. I mean, it's a funny thing actually because in my lifetime, attitudes towards the way people speak have changed. I mean, nowadays, kids are actually encouraged to speak in their own dialect
Yeah.
and speak in the way that's natural to them.
Hmm.
When I was a kid, we weren't allowed to speak, the dialect of the dialect of the northeast of Scotland is a very strong, very particular dialect,
Yeah.
and at school you weren't allowed to speak in this dialect. You were kind of trained to speak, proper English
Yeah.
thing, and I think it's certainly the case. I mean, I remember, people would use a different voice. They would use their posh voice if it was like a formal situation. And I remember being on a bus with a friend when we were like 7 years old or something, and his mum was there, and she was speaking to someone, and my friend was going, Mom, why are you speaking in the posh voice? Right in front of it's like, and I was like, God, and even at
Shut up,
7 years
son.
old, I
This
was
is
like,
the only voice.
exactly. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think they were very kind of formalized, basically artificial voices that people were using. I mean, the classic BBC kind of voice, when you hear it now, it just sounds weird,
Yeah.
But so I think definitely, and I had that in mind, creating this kind of like, the way the voice that you hear on those tracks is not the way I speak. In case
I
anyone's
was
wondering,
really excited to find out. I was like, if this is what this guy
it's like,
sounds like, this is gonna be so crazy.
just everyone's going to be really disappointed now, kind of. But I think as well there was like I mean I'm naturally quite
So that is your own
shy,
voice,
but
though.
it is my
That's
voice,
cool.
yeah, yeah. But
Regardless of whether it's your day-to-day talking voice, that's awesome that it is
yeah,
actually you. After I talked to you the
yeah,
other day, I'm like, I wonder if that's even him.
yeah, yeah.
That's
Because
really cool.
yeah, I mean one of my brothers and his son, when I first saw them after they'd heard Exoplanetary, they at one point they said, my brother said, "Is that your voice?" Even he didn't
Yeah.
recognize it. And I'm going, "Yeah, it is." And he said he didn't think it was my voice, but his son, my nephew, he thought it was my voice. But I do kind of fiddle about with it sometimes in some ways, and obviously when you hear these changes in pitch, that's another thing that kind of that alters the sound of my natural voice. Um, and I think I was going to say like I'm not naturally. I'm quite shy in the spotlight. Um, as a musician, I don't enjoy performing. On the
Mm.
stage. I used to like it enough when there was other band members, and I only enjoyed it. I started off playing the drums. I was a drummer, and
You can kind of hide as a drummer.
yeah, and I think you can hide behind your drums, and but also I think because the energy you can let off all the nervous
Oh yeah,
energy
that's
and you
true
get it out
too.
of your system. And I was very confident as a drummer, I think as well, and so I didn't feel conscious of like making any mistakes or anything. But otherwise, I kind of don't enjoy it. I mean, I'll do it if necessary, but I'm really like a studio based person. I really enjoy that side of things. However, I think there's a bit of a frustrated actor in there, maybe, and being able to do something like this, where I guess you could describe it as voice acting.
Yeah,
Um,
very much so.
it's kind of, well, I'm kind of flattering myself, but
No, I would
um,
absolutely agree.
well, it's. I mean, my attitude there was, and it's just not to hold back.
Yeah.
You just got to give it everything, and then it can work.
Hmm.
And I think again we're talking about this thing about inhibition, like when you're learning to speak another language, you really have to get beyond that and just go for it.
Hmm.
And if you can do that, that's when things I think start to work. But I couldn't help thinking of some of the most famous actors that we know, how shy they are
Yeah.
in real life, which is quite a thing. But I kind of get that now,
Hmm.
It's
Yeah, because when
it's
you're in your
funny.
persona, it's not you. It's
Yeah,
you
yeah,
are embodying another. You are becoming the character, and
yeah,
you
yeah,
say, hey, this isn't Michael right now. This is Johnny.
yeah, yeah. Exactly, exactly. And it's strange how that kind of takes over, and you don't feel that it's you. You're kind of somewhere behind this kind of persona that's been created that isn't you, and so you don't feel the same levels of kind of inhibition or whatever. And in saying that, I'm not sure how I would manage if I could do that on stage in front of an audience or something like that, I think that would be really, really hard,
Yeah. No,
really
that totally
tough.
makes sense to me. Because like, not that I don't know, we didn't get very popular doing this thing, but me and my brother made an album a couple of years ago. And
Yeah,
back around 2000, we used to play concerts all the time as a full
yeah,
band. And when I
right,
was a
right,
vocalist back then, I was very, very nervous about singing.
yeah,
And in
yeah,
2014 or so, when me and my brother were working on this project, I knew that we would never go up on stage with it. And
yeah,
knowing that people would never see me actually sing, I was
yeah,
able to open up in a way that I never had in the past because I knew
yeah,
I wouldn't
yeah,
have to do it in front of people
yeah,
ever.
yeah,
Like, I'm going to do this
yeah,
one
yeah.
time. If I can get it right, I can just put it down and it's done.
That's it.
And
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
so. That has nothing to do with this, but just to say,
yeah,
I
yeah,
totally appreciate what you're saying right now because I had
yeah,
the same experience of when you know that all you have to do is do this in the studio and you get it
yeah.
right the one time and you don't have to do it
Mhm.
again.
Yeah, no,
It's
absolutely, and I think that's one of the fascinating things as well about that kind of studio environment, I love the whole process of putting things together. I don't know if I'm unusual in this sense as as a musician or whatever. Most musicians I think really get the greatest thrills out of playing live.
mhm.
Whereas I'm kind of the opposite. I get the thrill of doing the doing stuff in the studio environment. I'm sure there must be quite a lot of creators, music artists, creators who are the same, I guess. But yeah, it's certainly the case with
Well,
me.
I think there's a totally different thing that you're going for, also knowing that, like, there's some albums that I've listened to where I hear a song that I'm like, this is so stupid. But when I see this live, the crowd is gonna go crazy.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah,
this is not made for the album, this is
yeah,
practice for the show. This
yeah,
is
yeah,
audience, when we do this part, you know what to do.
yeah. Oh no, I mean, there are bands who've kind of like made a career out of that, I
Yeah,
guess. I
well,
mean,
that's the whole like arena rock anthem stuff, you know what I
yeah,
mean? It's like,
and
just
I
imagine when the
worked.
crowd is all singing with us.
Yeah, exactly. And I worked with this guy when I was a painter decorator, and he was a Deadhead. He was a Grateful Dead fan.
Yeah,
Even in Scotland we get them.
they're all over
And
the world.
yeah, exactly. And he used to play. It was great actually working with him because usually guys would just put on the radio and all that. You get all the mainstream pop stuff, drive you crazy.
Hmm.
But he would take a tape recorder with him and he would have all these bootleg sort of live
Nice.
recordings of the Grateful Dead. So I'm really familiar with the Grateful Dead through working with this guy. And I remember once we used to be able to get vinyl out of the library, as well as taking books out of the library, you could take out
Oh
records.
man, that sounds really cool.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't know how widespread a thing that was, but certainly where I lived in Aberdeen, you could do that, and it was great because you could take out stuff that you like the look of without spending money on it,
Yeah.
and kind of see if you liked it or not,
Yeah.
and but I just out of curiosity, I came across there was a Grateful Dead album that had these songs that I recognised from his bootleg tapes. I thought I'll see what their studio stuff sounds like. So I took that out, and I couldn't believe the difference. It was like a completely different band.
Yeah.
And it was this kind of like really kind of slow, kind of much more country style.
Hmm.
There's always a bit of country style in the Grateful Dead, but this was really kind of it's like it's just the same band, but there you have it. The Grateful Dead. I think their own fans don't like their studio
Yeah.
stuff.
Yep.
They hate it.
It's just practice. They know what the lyrics are that they're gonna need to sing along to when the
Yeah,
day comes that they're standing there in front of
exactly.
them.
Exactly, and it's true. I mean, I think there's some music is just made for the studio, and I think electronic music's well, of all varieties, is the kind of stuff that's made for listening, in your own kind of private experience. I mean,
Yeah.
even kind of, sort of dance stuff. I mean, dance stuff, I guess, is also meant to be listened to in a kind of a live environment or whatever. But I think with electronic music, it lends itself to that kind of headphones listening, which I love. I kind of prefer. I mean, been to a lot of concerts and gigs and things in the past, and I do enjoy it, but I've always enjoyed the listening experience in a home environment or on the train or whatever. I've always enjoyed that more than live music, to be honest.
Yeah. The one
So
thing I'll say when it comes to like dark ambient type of music, it seems that I haven't been to a lot of shows, but it seems like one of the sort of things that happens is everybody just kind of sits down and gets into their own head and listens,
yeah,
where
yeah,
it's not like a rock concert where everybody's like crushing up against the stage and
yeah,
look at me. It's like, okay, it's time
yeah,
for me to sit down and meditate for the next 45 minutes to Northont. And it was
yeah,
like, oh wow, this is what we're doing? Okay, cool.
yeah. It is. It's a different kind of experience,
Yeah,
Uh,
but I think something like Northont is different from you in a way where it's like his music could be more spontaneous, where I think we would want to see you reproduce those vocals and that sort of thing. You
yes,
know what I mean? Like it would
yeah,
be a
yeah,
really different, it would be a totally different task. So, I mean, if
yeah,
you found a way to make it work, I think it would be cool, but I could definitely see where your natural inclination would be to say, this is studio music.
yeah, yeah. I mean, it's saying that. I mean, it's. I don't know. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, if I was to do this stuff live, I think the emphasis would have to be on me doing kind of like vocal stuff, and I guess it would become, something that's not just like a music-based concert. It would become, almost like a reading or something in some ways.
Yeah. Yeah, well
Um,
that's interesting. And that's another thing I was going to say. Again, not trying to push you into doing this or something, but something that would be cool from your project's perspective is like,
mhm,
since you said that you've dug so deep into these characters, you
mhm.
just like riffing on it, just going like totally ad lib and like this is a new episode, but that
Yes,
would take a lot of concentration and like
yeah.
luck and you know.
Absolutely. I mean, I suppose it's possible if there was the kind of in the moment if there was like the spontaneity was there, but
Yeah.
these things I think
But then you'd have to put the music to the background and just basically press play.
yeah, yeah. I think it's the kind of thing that would have to be pretty well choreographed and everything written because there would be too much scope for things going horribly
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah, you
If you
basically have
left
to
it too
pick your
much to
battle.
chance. Yeah, and I think I'm the sort of person I think in that kind of live environment, I would need the structure to keep me kind of focused and under control.
Yeah.
But I mean, it is something I've thought about more, and it's not like I say, I always feel quite nervous about performing, to a point where I don't find it enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's a bit like flying for me. I don't like flying, and I know that it could be enjoyable,
It's just not.
looking down, but it just doesn't feel like it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, is these are kind of things that ideally you want to kind of like face up to them and kind of and and get beyond your kind of fears and things.
Yeah, some people
So
definitely feel that way.
yeah, so
other
so maybe one
other
day,
people,
but
I mean again, if you didn't ever want to, that would be cool. Nobody would
yeah.
push want to push you into doing something that you weren't comfortable with. But
No, I mean, I would definitely do it. If there was an opportunity for like a live performance of this stuff, but it would have to be pretty rigidly structured and so that I couldn't go
yeah.
wrong. Um, and I think the thing as well, the thing about reading off text, of course, you could try and memorize everything, but there's always that problem. Your mouth gets dry and you start to trip over words and everything. And that's that could be a difficult thing in a live environment
Yeah.
because people notice these things, even though you would carry on and you just keep going. You know that people notice if you've kind of like slurred a word or
Yeah.
you haven't pronounced it properly.
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of pressures. But in saying that, because I've done these kind of recordings, I used to kind of like make mistakes a lot. With just reading the stuff.
Hmm. Now you're
Um,
becoming the characters.
Yeah, I found it easier because you just kind of like you focus and you just keep going, and um, so yeah, maybe a stage kind of production at some
Yeah.
point, maybe.
Okay, so I guess I think I've been pondering the best way to go about this, but maybe if you could just kind of give us like some sort of an overview of the planetary situation. And my first question, I guess, is it a trilogy or is it still continuing? Because I think the shore rituals is not part of the planetary situation, right?
No,
Okay.
no, that's a separate thing. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
yeah.
So then, are you finished with the planetary series, or will there be more to come?
Oh, no, I mean, I'm definitely working on other stuff. I mean, I think it's like there's unfinished kind of threads there,
Hmm.
that need to be finished off. So I'm actually going to start working I've kind of made a little start recently, but I've had other things I had to get out the way. So I'm going to start working on something soon, get the narrative written, and then I've got a few ideas of where it might go, but not too much because, like I say,
It
I don't
leads
want to kind of
itself
lose
down the
that.
road.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
If
and
I ever get around to writing the stuff that I have outlined and such, I totally appreciate your way of writing, and I think
thank you.
a lot of the authors that I follow, well, one great example I think that his situation's been beat to death at this point, but George R.
Yeah,
R. Martin with the Game of Thrones series,
yeah,
that's how he does
yeah,
it. He
yeah,
built these characters, and then like,
yeah,
where does the story go? Who gives a shit? Look at these
yeah,
characters. Look at
yeah,
this world. We just play in the
yeah,
world now.
yeah,
You
yeah.
build a world, you build people in the world, and then you just see where it leads you. And I love that.
Yeah. But it's very interesting what Martin's done actually, because one of the reasons I think his work stands out is it's he combines the fantasy elements, but he has this heavy degree of sort of literary realism,
Yeah.
even naturalism. Naturalism's a kind of fiction that people tried to write. People like there was a couple of big name authors, especially French authors, and the idea was that you reproduce the world as it was
Yeah.
in the context of fiction. But some of the writers took that too far. I think Balzac, the French author Balzac, he's probably the best known guy who did this like naturalism. But the great thing about Martin is, most fantasy novels will follow that kind of archetypal story structure,
Yeah.
of a quest
Yeah.
or it might be something like an epic where, there's like the good kingdom fighting against the bad kingdoms or whatever.
Yeah.
But Martin kind of just ditches all that, and it's just like it's like
Yeah,
real
it's just the
history
world
doesn't
in
have.
all of its messy glory.
Yeah, yeah.
The
There's no
good guys are
beginnings and
bad
end.
guys. The bad guys are good guys. The That
Exactly.
favorite
Yeah,
character of yours, I don't care. They're dying now.
yeah. Exactly. Exactly.
That's my favorite
And it's
character. I wrote that character. I wrote that character for 10 years straight. Now I'm killing
yeah,
them.
yeah, yeah. There's nothing you can do about it.
That was one thing I loved about him. But yeah, not to get
Yeah,
too sidetracked from your stuff, which I do. So yeah, so
yeah,
what maybe if you want to do this, great. If not, just give a quick overview or
yeah,
whatever. But I would really like to just sort of hear in your own words what the Planetary series is about. If you'd like to
yeah,
just give like a brief overview of the whole thing, cool. If you'd like to break it down in a
yeah.
bit more detail per album, that's cool too. Whatever you're
Yeah.
comfortable with.
I think, crikey, I have to try and remember everything
Yeah.
the story. But I think one of the things. about it. There is, I suppose. Let me think. There's a funny thing for someone like myself who's written science fiction, and who's been very interested in all the kind of like the mysterious aspects of the natural world and stuff. Is I've never really been much interested in space until quite recently. And there were certain things that I just didn't understand about space. Some basic things. I didn't realize there were so many galaxies.
Yeah.
Like you have gaps in your knowledge. Everyone's got gaps in their knowledge somewhere. And one of the gaps I had was like to do with space. Then all of a sudden, I kind of found out more. And I always used to think, because in spite of the things I write about, I tend to be quite, I don't know, I try to be scientific. I love the idea of ghosts and UFOs, but I'm not sure I believe in their actual existence.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, well that's
and
why I was saying like this isn't even really dark. Like it is dark in its
mhm,
presentation, but in its
yeah.
theme it's very science based.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. And basically, there came a point where I just started to learn more about, the universe and space. And then this assumption I had that, oh, there's no such thing as aliens. The idea is great and whatnot, and it makes for great storytelling. But then when I found out more about space itself, I realized that yes, there are
There must be.
aliens. There must
They
be. I
don't
mean,
have to be
it's
on Earth, but
almost,
they are out there.
yeah, I mean, it's basically an inevitability,
Yeah.
I mean, the odds, and of course, the great scientists of our age have said this,
Hmm.
that yes, there is life out there, and I think, that really just got me interested in writing something that was more kind of a kind of more concrete kind of idea about aliens in relation to the way I'd ever thought about it, where I kind of start to think, well, what would be like a basis for a kind of like creating a sense of this idea being a reality,
Hmm.
in the sense that we, or aliens had actually kind of discovered a way to travel over the vast distances, and perhaps we discovered a way of traveling vast distances. And that's the great obstacle about the whole alien thing. Even if aliens do exist, the chances are that they wouldn't be able to travel very far, just like we can't really travel very far because the science makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible.
Yeah.
However, we can imagine these things. And so, I've always had an interest in ideas about the ancient world. And of course, those areas, those kind of like areas of the ancient world that you understand or know most about, will be in your own specific area.
Hmm.
So I just kind of like started to devise this idea, um, of a kind of like futuristic scenarios that were tied in to present day scenarios that were then tied into kind of you know ancient kind of like
Yeah.
scenarios, and
It's very
that whole thing.
Lovecraftian the way that you put it together.
Yeah, I mean, and quite intentionally, I guess. I wanted to make it, to give it that kind of like Lovecraftian, like cosmic horror kind of
Yeah, and
feel.
I don't mean like
Um,
tentacles. I mean like his
yeah,
way of like that's he did such a good job of saying like
yeah,
what would it have been like a million years ago on Earth, as
exactly.
opposed to
Yeah,
what it's like now,
yeah,
as opposed to what it's going to be a million years from now. Like
yeah,
that
yeah,
specific, like again, like the scientific part of it, not the tentacle part.
yeah,
Although
yeah.
the tentacles
There
are
are there
cool,
are
but
some.
yeah, and I think there's some of that in your stuff too.
Yeah, there has to be. There has to be. No, I mean, I think that's right, and I think it's for me, if you were to define like cosmic horror or Lovecraftian horror, I think for me the most interesting thing about it is that he tries to imagine the unimaginable.
Yep,
Unimaginable.
yeah, that's where
Yeah,
I'm saying. Yep.
yeah, exactly. It's exactly as you put it. And then he's trying to imagine how you know the universe could be or might be, beyond the universe as we know it. What might it be like on the other side of the universe, where the laws of physics break down as far as we can understand them,
Yep.
and that whole idea of trying to imagine, as you put it, what could have happened, a million years ago, it's that's kind of like the fascinating thing about it, if you like, and I think once you start to create a narrative like this, then people who are reading this, or in this case, listening to it, and I think this is one of the things that about reading is when you're reading, you're actually creating as well.
Mm-hmm.
You become a creator because you start to imagine things that are not actually in there in the novel. You
Yep.
know, you start to kind of like fill in any of the gaps. You start to create the world around it yourself. You know, and I think stories like this in particular, where you're kind of insinuating
Mm-hmm.
things in the past and you're insinuating things in the future, that insinuation that you give to the reader or the listener, they take that and they build a whole new thing out of
Yep.
it
You're
in their
planting a
own
seed
kind of
for them
head.
to grow.
Yeah, yeah, and that's why when it comes to storytelling, not to give too much to whoever's participating, because you take the fun away from it for them, you know.
Yeah.
Because and that's the great thing I think about storytelling. It's not just the storyteller who's the creative one.
Yeah, well,
It's
that's why I
everyone's
was saying I
different.
don't want to force you into going too far in explanations. Like, again, like any seeds that you'd like to plant, but yeah, I think it would be inappropriate to have you like fully lay out the situation.
No, because it hasn't been formulated yet,
Yeah.
I think. But I think the only thing I would say, what would I say? I actually, like I say, I haven't. There's a couple of ideas, definite things that will happen. That's for sure. Um, all I would say is that whatever happens next will tie in with what's gone before. You know, so there might be a few kind of unfinished threads that will be picked up on.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah,
I
so
don't
and
want to spoil the fun too much for people. I won't give too much away. But
I think, once we start talking about it, I'm like, I don't think I really want him to answer this. Like, I think it's best that you don't.
no, no, but it's
And
no, it's important to know something of what's on its way, you know, kind of thing, you know. But not too much, I guess, you know.
Yeah, so let me just hop in here real quick and say Felon Frost is her battery's probably died, but if she is still here or later on, I'd like to say thank you for stopping by. She was incredibly disappointed that she didn't catch the notification in a recent stream, so it appears that
Uh,
she caught this one luckily, or I did a better job of sharing on social media.
good one, yeah.
Johan of Desideri Marginus says dark ambient can be really powerful live, quite different from the album experience, admittedly, as we were talking about there a few minutes ago.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Deinonychus says the terrifying prospects of some of the solutions for the Fermi paradox are fertile ground for dark ambient. Absolutely.
Interesting. Yeah, yeah.
And the
It's worth
Desideri
exploring.
Marginus also just said a moment ago, filling in gaps to create a coherent story is a fundamental human quality.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
I just wanted to get in a little bit of their comments here.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Interested to hear. I mean, I think that last point is very, very true. I think we do have this instinct. It's a funny thing, storytelling, you know, and it's the question of why we need to tell stories and why we want to hear stories is there's all sorts of kind of ideas and theories around that, but it definitely is. It's a human need, you know,
hmm
and it's a very an instinctive thing, and in many ways, like Robert Louis Stevenson, you know, the author Robert Louis Stevenson, he felt that storytelling, like novels and stories for adults, like adults would read, it was a form of play for them.
Yeah.
You know, whereas kids would play with toys and things, you know, for adults, they play with things in their mind, you know.
hmm
But he always saw it as a form of play, and we needed to play, you know. So it's an interesting point, that last one. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's I don't, and so that's why you're the one that makes the dark ambient, and I'm the one that analyzes it. Because when I was a little kid, I'd watch my friends play with the toys, and I'd be like, I just feel like this isn't real. And like I wanted
Yeah.
the reality. So like I
Yeah. Yeah.
love watching somebody else's story, but I've never been able to put like I can't get into that headspace where I make my own, but I find it
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
I'm always very envious of people that can just sit down and build a world in their head, and I'm like, man, like I'll talk
Yeah.
about your world.
But it's you know, I think sometimes you know you could surprise yourself. I mean, I think that the difficult thing is having the idea that works in the first place, you know?
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just getting the idea. And it doesn't need to be the full blown idea. It's just like a little idea that triggers off something.
Yeah.
But actually getting the idea itself is very difficult, you know?
Hmm.
And you know, I'll very often I'll sit down and I'll start writing a story, and within a few sentences, I realize that there's nothing here that's going to kind of lead to anything,
Yeah.
and I'll just delete it, you know. And I'm quite brutal in that respect, you know.
Yeah.
And if there's anyone listening who is, you know, is interested in writing or anything, what I would say is to be brutal with it, because especially when you first start writing, you tend to hang on to everything,
Yeah.
you know, and keep everything and cherish everything and think this is my precious, precious thing I've written, you know. And it's hard to actually look at it and be objective and say, well, actually, that's not particularly good,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and throw it away or delete it. But
Yeah.
the thing to remember is none of it is a waste of time, because everything you write, if it's not working in terms of it becoming a story, it's still it's helping you get to the place, you know.
Yeah.
You have to go through these kind of trial and error things. And also, the more writing that you're doing, even if it's writing that doesn't work, the more it's helping you improve your writing, you know. So it's never a waste of time.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and you know, you just have to be honest with yourself and say, okay, it's not necessarily bad, but it's just not really leading anywhere. So ditch it, you know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so Desideri Marginus then said, which is why it's also important to leave such gaps.
yeah, absolutely. That's a very, very good point. Yeah.
um,
Agreed.
Yeah, so Winter Logic says, I saw this Facebook post a little late. How dare you? You should keep an eye on my social media accounts 24 hours a day. No, I need to find a better way of like guaranteeing notifications to people, because it's like we have like 15 different ways to notify people and we've disabled all
Yeah,
of them because they just blow up our phones constantly.
really. Yeah.
And then he said, this is very much making me intrigued about your work, Alistair. We'll definitely listen to it later. Yeah, I highly
That's great.
recommend
Yeah.
that you check out the Planetary series for sure, and as that's
Thank
what
you.
we've talked about so far. So I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
would now be a perfect time for me to say that I really love Shore Rituals. I
Thank
love
you.
what you've done with that. I was
Mhm.
on the end of my downtime from things that's been sort of going over the last bit of time here.
Yeah.
And so I really got into it over the last few days, that I was like,
Mhm.
oh wow, I heard this thing one time and then like it just went off into the ether, and I'm like, I listened to it again the other day and I'm like, holy shit, like this is really good. And it is
Thanks.
quite different than the Planetary series. It feels like you were able to tap into a different part of your inspiration with that album. It just
Yeah.
it. So if you'd like to tell us a little bit about, how
Yeah.
that inspiration came up and how it feels different to you.
Well, it's things. I mean, it's really the inspiration for it is really a particular place, and it's a piece of the coastline called it's the Banffshire Murrayshire coast. Which, if you look at the northeast of Scotland, it's kind of like it's like an angle, and it curves down, and it's the bit that kind of goes along the north side. And you know, if you're on the shore, you're facing north. Um, and it's an important place for me because my mother's side of the family come from that area. They were all like fishing folk, you know, they were all fishermen and everything,
Wonderful.
and it's a fascinating area. Um, it's a beautiful piece of coastline, and it's a bit of a hidden gem.
Nice.
You know, in Scotland, there's tourism is probably the most important industry
Yeah.
for Scotland, and you know, we get a lot of tourists, but they tend to go mostly to the west coast,
Okay.
which is very beautiful. You know, the west coast of Scotland. You know, it's like, you know, if you go down the west coast of Norway, the west coast of Scotland, down Wales, and there's the northwest of England, Cornwall, then Ireland and the west coast, all of that area is just extremely beautiful. You know,
Mm-hmm.
and the west coast of Scotland is really really spectacular, and so people go there. There's beautiful islands. You got all the kind of scenes that you see and all the films and stuff, and so most tourists go there. And this bit in the northeast, this Banffshire Morayshire coast, hardly anyone goes there. And you have these little picturesque fishing villages, which are mostly used. They're not used for fishing anymore. The fishing kind of died out there, became more industrialized, and Aberdeen, Peterhead, a place called Peterhead, are the big fishing places. So basically, this place kind of means personally quite a lot to me, but it's also just, from the point of view of the natural world and the atmosphere, it's a beautiful place to be. It's quite rugged, quite wild, very exposed to the north. I think as well, I lived in Italy for 10 years, and when you live abroad or you live, far away from your home, you get homesick and you develop, I guess, an even stronger attachment to the place that you come from,
Yeah.
And I had a wonderful time living in Italy. It was just fantastic, and the Italians were just terrific people. And I always love going back, but you get homesick no matter what. And so I think that this just became kind of more kind of important to me, if you like. But at the same time, I don't like to make things too personal, if you know what I mean.
Hmm.
And there's things about any area that there's local legends and local kind of folk tales and historical anecdotes about all sorts of places, and all of this stuff I think is really good fodder for dark ambient, and it's one of the areas that I think dark ambient thrives off of, ideas about the ancient world, strange tales, and so on. And so, sure, Rituals was just really an attempt to kind of capture the atmosphere of this particular place and kind of like, try and create something that could be applied universally to any kind of coastline anywhere in the world, that has its own kind of tales and legends and its own kind of atmospheric qualities and stuff. So yeah, I mean that's basically the kind of what underlies it.
Yeah, well that's I was laughing a couple of minutes ago and then I was just typing because I'm listening to you and simultaneously going crazy because I can't remember the name of the story. So, as you were describing this fishing village to me, I'm like this sounds like the Shadow over Innsmouth like
Of
I'm
course,
just like
yeah,
imagining like the only thing that's left is to find out that one of these people is actually a fish person. Sorry for
yeah.
spoiler alert.
No, but there's definitely an element of that, and it's actually, I mean, in Archaeoplanetary, there's a couple of sites mentioned in there that are part of that same coastline,
Oh,
and
nice.
there's Cullen. I can't remember the title of the song now, but there's a place called Cullen that's mentioned, and that's where my grandmother was from. And that's incidentally is the town where the brothers of Boards of Canada, they grew up in this town called Cullen, which is on that same bit of coastline.
That's cool.
Um, and that's what I was meaning earlier on when I said that their music kind of resonates with me because
Hmm.
it seems to capture something of the atmosphere of that area. So it's all ties in.
Yeah, I think that's very important when you're working with fiction, whether it's to build a dark ambient album's narrative or to write a book or something.
Yeah.
I think if you can, it's nice to say, oh, I'm going to write something about some other part of the world, but you don't really know that part of the world. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
if when you're writing about places that are part of a reality, that are part
Mhm.
of like say maybe the past or the future of your story, and you know that place, so
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
people like will resonate with that knowing of that place.
I think so. Yeah.
And then when you're building your more fantastic elements,
Mhm.
then you can just dive into your imagination and
Yeah.
you're not trying to
Exactly.
trick somebody into thinking that you know a place that really is there but you've
Yeah.
never seen it.
Yeah.
No, you are imagining up a brand new place that nobody has
Yeah.
ever seen before. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the combining of landscapes that you know with something just totally out
Yeah,
of this world is a really nice
yeah.
combination.
I think no, absolutely, and I always think as well. I mean, um, it's not really the same area, but there's obviously an obvious need um, to put emphasis on on environmentalism and the threat of not just climate change, but a lot of wild habitat is disappearing and transforming these beautiful areas into something else,
Yeah, it's so sad.
and yeah, and it's in the same way, I always feel that the best approach to doing something to save environment is to concentrate in your local area. If everyone concentrates on the area they know best, perhaps then we can do something about it. Whereas if you fret about the whole world's doomed, and if you think too broadly, there's nothing you can do. I mean, you can't do anything to stop what's happening on the other side of the world, or whatever. But you can do something to be part of what's going on in your own local area.
Yeah,
Um, and it's a bit of a stretch in a way, but it's a similar thing I think with writing, because it's always a bit of a question in writing. Some people will say write what you know,
hmm,
and other people will say no, 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 use your imagination, write what you want. But I do think that if writers or artists, musicians, if they were all to do something that represents the part of the world that's local to them, then everyone else can learn about it. You know what I
exactly.
mean?
I visit your
And it's like an
places, you
exchange.
visit my places, but I don't need to pretend
Yeah,
like I know your places.
yeah, yeah, and it's what makes it really interesting when you read or experience the work of someone else from another place.
Hmm.
They're introducing you, they're taking you into their world, and they're the best ones, the ones most equipped to be able to show you their world.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but yeah, yeah, it's an
yeah.
interesting one.
I
So
was recently reading Aki Cederberg. He's one of the guys that did some work with Oral Hypnox some years back, and
yeah,
he released a book recently of basically his travels through India. And oh my
right,
God,
right,
I just like the descriptions that he was able to give because he's just pulling these
yeah,
directly from his memory and his
yeah,
journals. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like,
yeah,
God, like the world that I was in was just, it was
yeah,
such an amazing place to be in my head. I've
yeah,
never been there. I could never write
yeah,
that. But yeah, you go into his world and it's like, what a
yeah,
crazy
yeah,
world this is.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
No, it's interesting. Yeah, but I mean, the whole thing about place, um, and there's a term that's used. I think where does it come from? Must come from Latin, of course. It's
mhm.
genius loci, and it means spirit of place. And it's the idea that every place has its own kind of unique kind of spirit, its own unique atmosphere.
Yeah,
And I think actually, when I think about it, that's one of the things about shore rituals. It's that kind of attempt to capture the kind of like the spirit of the place, the genius
I
loci
felt that very
of
much
that.
listening to it. That
Yeah,
you were
yeah,
really bringing a special place. It was a place that
yeah,
was special to yourself that you were really unveiling to
yeah,
us. I really picked that up in listening to it.
yeah. I mean, there's certainly that's a big part of it, and I think as well. I mean, it's like I say, and I think this is the thing about dark ambient music. It's you're on a mission to kind of create an atmosphere through the music,
Hmm.
you know, and or recreate an atmosphere in this case,
Yeah,
and I think that's possibly the biggest attraction for people when they listen to dark ambient is to immerse themselves in this kind of atmosphere. Um, and much of dark ambient music isn't particularly musical. There are no kind of intricate melodies. There are no kind of like intricate movements and stuff. Deliberately so, because it's more about the evocation of particular atmospheric qualities.
yeah.
And so Shore Rituals is aiming to kind of do that. Really, it's a kind of an exercise in the creation particular atmospheric qualities, really. Yeah.
Yeah, so now that one, I guess, from the way that you're talking, that one is going to be like a one-off album. That's not the starting of a new series. That was just you having fun with a place.
Well, you never know.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But no, I mean, no, I mean it will be a one-off album in itself. Yeah, I mean it's not going to be part of any narrative. There's only a
Okay.
couple of spoken word elements, but there is a sense in which there could be a series based on the rituals aspects of things.
Yeah, that would be cool. Well, that's what I was wondering. That would be really cool. It's I mean, again, you do whatever you want to do, but
Yeah,
I would love to hear more of both of these two different
yeah,
strains that these two different paths that you're headed down. They're both
yeah.
musically amazing and just very intriguing and enjoyable to listen to
Well,
in
thanks very
general.
much. Appreciate it. Yeah.
So,
But if that was to happen, it would be a more of an abstract thing. It's like it wouldn't be like a series in the same way that the Planetary albums are.
yeah. Yeah.
But we'll see where it goes.
Yeah, that's cool. All right. Well, I think this is probably a pretty natural wrapping up point then. We're
Yeah,
relatively close to 2 hours, so I don't want to hop off
yeah.
onto a brand new topic and then run us off into the weeds for another 45
No,
minutes.
I just won't stop if you give me the chance. It's
Hey,
just great fun being
that
able to
makes my
speak to
job easier. No.
you.
No,
Fun.
I really appreciate you opening up in the way that you have, and it's nice to
That's fun.
just have a chance to get into people's heads.
Yeah,
If I'm just
yeah,
asking you like straightforward questions and you giving me a straightforward answer, it's hard to get to know you, and
yeah,
that's
yeah,
the
yeah.
whole point of this thing is to I don't know if I was saying it to you or to somebody else the other day, but it's like I think I was saying it to somebody here near me that
Yeah.
the people don't have never seen or heard a single word out of the mouth of
Yeah.
99% of dark ambient musicians. It's not
Yeah,
like the
yeah,
rock world where it's like, oh yeah, that's that guy. Like I'm
yeah.
still trying to get Simon to come on here cuz Simon is like one of the
Oh,
rock stars of the dark ambient genre, and the whole
absolutely.
thing is like, who is this
Yeah,
guy? I've been
yeah,
talking to him for
yeah.
years and like I don't have a person in my head.
But it's a funny thing. It is a strange thing, but I suspect that the anonymity of the artist is part of the appeal in a way,
Yeah.
because it's just like, the dark ambient artists, it's not the people behind it. You think of what's there projected in front. It's a bit like what we were talking about earlier with the actor's voice.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things I really like about dark ambient. And in fact, a lot of electronic music is like that.
Hmm.
You know, there's no people kind of spoiling it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, they're just like, you've got their music, you've got like a particular image of some kind being projected or idea that's projected. And I think
Yeah.
people like that.
Yeah,
But,
no,
but you're right, you're right.
I
You
think it
love to
goes
hear
it
that.
certainly goes in both ways, and
Yeah, yeah,
because the thing that really, led me down this path, it sort of planted the seed was hearing Bruce of God Body Disconnect. He did
yeah,
like a
yeah,
2.5, 3 hour interview one time, just like a
yeah.
podcast. And I
Cheers.
was like, this is so interesting to hear about
Yeah,
this guy, because
yeah, yeah,
but yeah, there's a balance to it, and certain people
yeah,
just don't want to
yeah,
do
yeah.
it at all, but I am
Yeah.
personally really glad that you decided to step out of the shadows and have a
Yes.
conversation with us today.
I will crawl right back into them immediately. No, but no, it's been a pleasure. It really is a pleasure to speak to you, and I really appreciate being invited on.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Yeah,
great
like
stuff.
I said, you're ever since the first album that you did for Cryo Chamber, I was just blown away from the beginning. I was like, this is not the average here. This is something, and not from a technical standpoint, just from a thematic standpoint. It's like, man, this is just completely off to the side of everything
Yeah,
that I've heard before in dark ambient. So,
it's interesting.
I
I
was
think, I
really
mean,
intrigued to get to meet you.
No, it's great. But I think there is a sense of dark ambient starting to diversify a bit as well, and you mentioned Bruce, and he's done some great spoken word,
Yeah.
narrative stuff and his stuff as well. So yeah, I mean, it's kind of intriguing to see where things are going. But thanks very much for your kind words, I have to say.
Yeah,
I'm glad to know
absolutely.
that it's working
Yeah,
for someone. It's great.
yeah, for sure. And hopefully, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people already know about your work, but it sounds like a couple people here today are discovering it for the first time. So for
Right,
those of you
right.
guys that are,
Yeah,
have fun because you're in for
yeah,
some really great stuff. There are several hours of amazing places for you to go through
yeah,
Alistair's music. So yeah, we'll go ahead and wrap it up here. So thank you so
yeah.
much, Alistair, for coming on here today and talking to
Um,
us. Uh,
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for everyone who's come along to tune in.
yes, absolutely.
Much appreciated.
Yeah, thanks to all of you guys in chat as well. Everybody here is showing their love. So
Good, good of
uh,
them. That's nice of them. Thank you.
yeah, so all right, cool. Well, have a great day, Alistair, and
Yeah,
same to all of you in chat. I will see you all soon. Bye.
brilliant. Thanks, Michael. Take care now.
Peace.
Bye bye.